Hey, welcome back to the Bitcoin Reformation Podcast. I'm Ben Haupt here with David Ruffner and Jared Townley. Great to be back with you guys. And Jared, how are things going your way?
The most exciting thing that we are experiencing now is my 11, almost 12-month-old kid is walking. So just one of those like super awe-inspiring things. Like you go from the furniture crawling to then they take a few steps, and then within like a week's time, it's like leaps and bounds. Like I'm doing 2-3 steps. Now I'm like trying to walk across the room. Now I'm running all over the place, and the joy on his face, like the expression of, oh my goodness, I'm on my 2 feet, I'm walking, look at me, I'm so proud. It truly like warms your heart and is one of those like cool, oh my goodness, this is so great, God, like just the way you've made humans and how they learn is just so awe-inspiring. So that's the big thing at home. Really exciting thing going on at work. So I serve at a church, right? We're switching roles kind of to the associates pastors there, and I've been doing some interviews with people who do youth ministry, because that's going to be one of my new buckets and responsibilities. And it's been really exciting, really invigorating to sort of ask questions like, how have things been done in the past? You know, what is the philosophy that you have in youth ministry, and kind of brainstorming what things could look like. So it's really exciting for me to dream a little bit and to wonder what could be, and you know, what are we hoping to give to the youth that we serve and the youth that we bring Jesus to. So that's what's going on in my world, my life here. David, what's going on in California?
With my family, we are fresh back from vacation. We were gone Wednesday to a Wednesday. We went up the east side of the Sierras, went to Big Pine, California, and then up to the Big Pine Lakes. It was hot, but we kept climbing till we were getting above some of the heat, but got to see some alpine lakes in John Muir Wilderness, and then we swung north and through the backside of Yosemite Tioga Pass. If these things don't resonate with you, let's talk. Let's plan your family's trip there. Tioga Pass, Yosemite Valley, just on a day trip. We had a day to kill in Fresno, California, which is not the type of place a lot of people probably pick to go on vacation, but it was in between. We took in a minor league baseball game. The hotel was right next to a brand new In-N-Out Burgers, so the kids were happy. Great baseball game, and then we finished out with 3 nights and 4 days in Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park, seeing some giant sequoias, and a great hike. Saw my first rattlesnake here in the state of California. Just about stepped on it, which is, I think a rite of passage, really. So we're all back. The youngest son is off to his first day of work. He had sort of those like first day of school nerves. It was fun, fresh, good to see. And of course, he's working with a big brother, which means they're working on boat docks here in our resort town. They both have some protection, but there's also some rites of passage that I think he's going to be put through. Close to snipe hunts, if you will, as he begins his work with older brothers and other folks. So that's my crew. We have a visiting pastor in town, friend from Chicago, Joel Hess, Lutheran pastor on sabbatical. He'll be preaching at our little mountain church here. And then to round it out, get this, I'm now the head elder at our small little mountain church. And the oldest son may well soon be the vice chairman of the church. So put your young people in positions of leadership. Why not? Why not? That's what we have. Back to you, Ben. What's happening with the Haupt family?
Can the vice chairman vote out the head elder?
Oh, that's a great question. I love it.
Where's the authority lie, right?
My life would be easier if I were not in leadership there, so.
That's awesome. And I totally could relate to your rattlesnake story. I remember hiking the part of the Appalachian Trail, the right where it starts in Georgia, which was very close to my second call, and I nearly stepped on a rattler. Definitely spooked him. He rattled his tail vigorously and had his claws or his fangs out, and I screamed like a little girl and ran. And or a little boy, I don't know, not to be too sexist, but I screamed like a child and ran away, and we threw sticks at it until it left the trail. and then we ran through the trail very nervously. So yeah, fun times. And Jared, as you were talking about your kid walking, I was looking around your background and wondering if your house is totally toddler proofed. And I was looking at the bottom shelf there of your bookshelves and wondering if how all that stuff will go. So good luck with that. Those are interesting times, and you'll be doing, if you don't get your exercise in already, you'll be doing a lot of chasing the toddler around. Things are great for me and for the Haupt family. We just got back from some vacation as well. This was just my wife and I, and it was to the big island of Hawaii, to a retreat for Lutheran pastors by Eden Above the Sea. Jeff and Linda Mueller. Fabulous time. It was amazing. They were ridiculously good to us. It was a huge gift, and it was just very, very restful. So I did get beat up on some rocks. Volcanic rock is not kind to snorkelers, and I came out of the water at one point bleeding fairly profusely, and so I got out of the water before the sharks came, because there was blood in the water. So it was a fun time, but we made it, and a lot of good memories, and I didn't get eaten by sharks. So we're now packing the house, and maybe you can see that off to the sides of my camera. The house is a complete disaster, and I have asked my wife, can we wait for these bookshelves to be packed at the very end? Because I have this podcast, and it's the best backdrop, but this is alas the last backdrop for this podcast, and we'll be coming to you from a different location from here on out. Hey, we have a guest with us. This is our first guest ever, and I'm super excited to introduce him to our listeners. Sam Sessa. Sam was a seminary student of mine and fast became a friend, and Sam and I have stayed in touch, and we've had some good debates about Bitcoin and lots of other things. Sam is a really sharp guy, and Sam posed a number of questions to me and to us as podcast hosts. And Sam is admittedly a bit of a Bitcoin skeptic. And we thought, hey, that would actually be kind of fun just to have conversation. I promised Sam before we started recording that we wouldn't beat up on him, and I will hold myself to that promise. So we're just jazzed to have you with us, and tell us a little bit about you, your family, and then we can launch into your skeptic questions.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to be invited here among the equivalent of the KJV only group of Bitcoin truthers. And I'm not going to beat up on any of y'all either. Not that I think I would be very successful at it. So I've been a pastor the last 6 years out here in Colorado at Redeemer Lutheran Church. And I recently accepted a call to be the senior pastor at Resurrection Lutheran Church in Cairo, New York. It's going to be a massive change for my family and I. Leah, my wife of almost 15 years, and our 3 kids, Ben, Charlotte, and Marley. We are going out to rural New York. I'm originally from South Florida area. I actually visited one of the churches that Ben was called to as a pastor in Boca Raton one time. I don't think Ben was there as a pastor at that time, but we went once. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about Bitcoin. I have strong thoughts on it, but I come with the promise to each of you that I come open mind, with the willingness to change and repent of my folly. Should y'all convince me?
So I'm hearing Ben.
Before we get into any of the questions, Sam, I would love to hear sort of your when did you first hear about it? Like kind of, if you want to say your Bitcoin skeptic story, tell us a little bit about your background interaction with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm always interested in news and information and technology. And so I don't think I knew about Bitcoin when you could mine it on like a Windows XP desktop. but definitely by the mid-teens, I was aware of it. So maybe 2014-ish. And I always thought, okay, that's interesting. And then it became like a really big deal. And then I was really investigating like what blockchain technology and the uses of it, and heard about, I don't think the first time I heard about Bitcoin was with the Silk Road incident, where you had this black marketplace doing a bunch of kind of shady deals using Bitcoin. But what I definitely remember when the thought of Bitcoin was that it was completely secret. And then I also remember when people found out, oh, wait, we can use technology so it's not secret at all. And following a bunch of other kind of police using Bitcoin tracking to track down criminals. So I've been paying attention to it for a long time. I listen to several different technology focused podcasts, and Bitcoin has come up a couple of times in them. And so I've read a lot. I've seen a lot. I don't have any money. I'm broke, so I've never invested. But that's more kind of a lack of money on my part. I just don't have any money to throw around in different kinds of investment things. So I would also say, though, that I, like many other millennials, graduated from high school and college, came into a poor market situation. I got burned on Mary Kay. So like my hackles, my senses are very attuned to the possibility of losing money. And then with the pandemic. So I think a lot of millennials are can be really concerned about falling for money scams. Not that Bitcoin itself is a scam, but I've seen a lot of NFT and cryptocurrencies act as pump and dump scams.
Yep.
100%. Well, great. I was going to throw myself in there and say Ben made promises, Sam made promises. I made no such promises to behave myself. No, but actually, we've talked about that from the beginning, Sam, and I suppose listeners, that we had fun on the phone or on Zoom, just the three of us, for months leading up to this, just saying, I'm not alone. And what do you know?
Yeah.
What are you pushing out on? But there came a point where we said, not only is this an enjoyable conversation, but part of our eagerness, our heart for this is, if we love our neighbors, if we love our friends, if we love our family members, can we make this conversation accessible to others? So of course, this is not going to be about slamming anybody or even about winners and losers, but maybe trying to speak winsomely. And we'll see where the arguments go. We'll see if there's any movement. I feel, though, Sam, we should almost have like a number system for you to hold up, sort of 1 through 10. You sort of the judging, the gymnasts, judges on the side.
Okay.
So you ask a question, we give an answer. But yeah, great to meet you, Sam. And this is a fun episode. Hopefully the first of maybe more like this, whether with you and others also.
Very cool.
All right, so we're going to dive into these questions. Sam has sent us a number of questions ahead of time. They're really perceptive questions that you probably, we hope that other people will have also wondered about some of these things, and that our listeners might say, oh yeah, I've had that question too. And I'm glad that Sam asked that, and that'll give us a chance to answer, and maybe we'll be convincing, and maybe we'll need to go back to the drawing board and think about some of these further ourselves. So friendly conversation. Maybe David gets a little hostile, but Jared and I will hold him back. And, we're all just coming to each other over Zoom, so there won't be any fists thrown or any punches thrown or anything like that. So good. Well, let's dive right into the questions. Sam, you have the questions in front of you, so I'll let you pose them, and if you want to reword them or whatever, we we have them in the order that you sent them to us, as 1 through 8, and we'll just kind of take them in that turn. We've the three of us have divided up those questions amongst ourselves. So by all means, have at it.
Yeah, so I took those questions, and when I texted them to you, Ben, they were kind of as they came to mind.
Yeah.
And thinking about, okay, what are the things about Bitcoin that I'm maybe less excited about, or perhaps concerned, or skeptical of. So here are my 4 buckets, and then y'all can decide which bucket you want to take first. So my first bucket of questions is practical utility and adoption. The second bucket is environmental and societal impact. Third is currency or commodity. And then fourth is crap hitting the fan situations.
Like it.
Where do you want to start?
We can start at the top of your list, Sam. That sounds great. If you've ordered it, you
okay.
All
right. Practical utility and adoption. Okay, so as of the time of this recording, I have only the third episode of the podcast has only been released, and so I don't know when this episode will be released, and perhaps there will be further episodes, and we are kind of retreading old ground, so to speak. But as I think about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, I don't think that they solve a real problem. Now, I do see how they solve some problems, but I don't think that they solve a real problem. And this question point, whatever, is definitely hyperbolic, right? But I do think that blockchain technology is a technology in search of a use case.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right. More so than like other types of technology.
So are you willing to share a little bit more, Sam? You say you see some problems that it's attempting to address. What are some of those? Can you bring me up to speed there?
So I can see probably the best use case for Bitcoin particularly, not necessarily for blockchain technology. Those are interrelated but separate discussions, right? But for Bitcoin is as an international method of a wealth transfer. You can send Bitcoin from here to Dubai and exchange however many portions of a coin, is either to give someone money, to receive money, to possibly pay for a good or a service. It is able to, then you can use some other kind of exchange to transfer it into whether dollars or yen or whatever your denomination preference is. So that to me is the best use case for Bitcoin specifically, is for international wealth transfer.
Okay. And I've never done that. I've never sent Bitcoin internationally from one person to another. I know over the Bitcoin network, actually, both Jared and I sent a few dollars Ben's way because Ben paid for this tool that is hosting this video and audio recording and the stitching of it all together after the fact. So we had fun, so we've done little transfers, little payments. But I've never done that. But that is a use case so that our hearers can hear that. For instance, here in California, we've got a lot of people from other places in the world, right? From Mexico, Central America, South America. And this is no surprise. This is just a description of reality. A lot of these folks come to America to be able to not only earn a wage that leads to a better life for themselves, but to send money back home. And the name for that is remittance payments. And traditionally, remittance payments have been done through the likes of like Western Union. We've all heard that before. Maybe even we remember from yesteryear seeing Western Unions, or even more of them. And the idea is I take it to Western Union, they take it, they wire it down to wherever my family is. They go to a local shop and get it and pull it out. There's a few issues with that. There's a huge time lag, I understand, which is really unfortunate. There is also a pretty good cut off the top that Western Union gets. I've heard anywhere from 5 to 20%, depending on instances, depending on the local currency. And then finally, there's even some safety issues, apparently in some countries, your family getting on the bus, going on a 1-2 hour bus ride to go to the
Mhm.
Western Union, to stand in the line and be seen as doing what? Pulling out, money in the local currency. There's
Mhm.
shakedowns that happen, that type of thing. So you're exactly right. The Bitcoin network can be used to send purchasing power, Bitcoin, globally. This could be done
Mhm.
between countries, I suppose, organizations, companies, but certainly for
Mhm.
people. And to do it for pennies on the dollar as opposed to 5 to 20%. I mean,
Mhm.
that's huge, right? That's huge. So that is one thing. I've never used it that way. I don't know, Ben, Jared, anybody here? So I think the three of us have a different use case, Sam. I'd
Mhm.
start there. For me, it's been a
Sure.
savings vehicle. I, like you, had no dollars to save, and at
Mhm.
some point said, of the no dollars that I have, I'm going to take a very small amount of the no dollars every paycheck and put it in there. In fact, well, I don't know if this was an internal discussion or one on a podcast before, Sam, but I described that my wife and I, for the first, in our case, then 16 years of marriage, we struggled to ever save any dollars because they were there in savings or checking, and because we had constant need. Anything we tried to save
Mhm.
so easily got swallowed up and used. So I would say that while
Mhm.
I have exercised, I have turned Bitcoin into cash. So I've proven myself that it is liquid. I've exercised that, right? At the same
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
it's not as liquid as dollars in my wallet or dollars in my bank account.
Mhm.
But for us, that's been great. That means as we've kind of put it off in that coffee bucket, right? It's
Mhm.
stayed there. But in this case, it's not only stayed there, but insofar as I've been through it now 5 years, it's amazing to see not just what a savings vehicle it's been, but a growth vehicle of those same savings. So that's a use case for me, just to broaden it out a little,
Yeah.
Sam. And real quickly, Jared and Ben, any other use cases come to mind for you before we take that further?
I mean, my thought kind of goes back to episode 3 of America's purchasing power problem, and this this really not just a use case. There are lots of uses for Bitcoin, but
Sure.
I think the primary reason that Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that was, that the reason that Bitcoin was invented was specifically because of a very particular problem. And it was in 2008, 2009, the bailouts that the governments were doing to the banks. And there was significant distrust among the banks, among central bankers who were bailing out these banks, and essentially a distrust in government. So the government, the US dollar gets issued by the US government. And if they only uh, issued, say, 21 million, no more, no less dollars, uh, then we would have a very stable currency. But
Mhm.
when the US government in 2008, 2009 bailed out these banks, they printed a whole bunch of money from nowhere. And all of a sudden, the dollar begins to become inflated. And it has only gotten much, much worse since the pandemic. And we all enjoyed getting those pandemic checks, but they had to print a lot of money out of thin air to make it happen. And now all of a sudden, my $1 doesn't go nearly as far. I paid a ridiculous amount of US dollars for this new house that we're moving into. And I would never have dreamed that a house that I would purchase ever in my life would be costing me what it costs today. But it's not
Mhm.
because I have such a lavish lifestyle. It's that the value of a US dollar just isn't worth as much. And so the real use case that I
Mhm.
think Bitcoin solves is the US dollar has become not a trustworthy monetary vehicle.
And
And so it actually, in the Bitcoin community, we talk about fixing the money, and it its vision is just that, to actually fix the problem that central banks have created. So it's a centuries old problem that Bitcoin is trying to solve.
I'll let Jared jump in there, and then I'll maybe wrap up at least our initial response to you on this, Seth. But I'm sorry, Sam. But Ben definitely went to the place that was kind of circling, and I would come to that same place too. But Jared, anything you want to add there?
I don't, not right now. I feel like there's a little bit later point when we talk about what is money, right? And what does money supposed to do? I mean, we're touching a little bit on it now, but I think later we'll get
What's
there.
amazing, that's Ben got it right. The initial block, now we're talking blockchain, but the initial block that was mined, messages can be put on this block that are there and can be read for all time. What did it say? Chancellor on brink of second bailout. There had been one bailout in the United Kingdom at the time. That was the headline on the same day as that Genesis block of the London Times, on the front page of the London Times. Satoshi appears to have copied and pasted it and put it in there. And that was happening not only in London, but that was happening elsewhere. And that was in the global financial crisis, the GFC of 08, 09, that spilled into 010. What's amazing is to see how small those central bank bailouts were then compared to what has happened since, particularly 2020 and beyond. I just read from Lynn Alden's Broken Money that she said from 20 to 21, 25% of the US dollars ever to be in existence were printed or brought into existence in that time. So that's broad money supply. And it's not brought to everybody. If proportionally that money was spread out to everybody, that would be the same as just changing the decimal point, behind the money that we have. My proportion wouldn't be any different one day to the next. But the issue is when new money is created, it does not come equally to all. And so some profit from it, and then many of us have our dollars diluted out from underneath us. So that was 20 to 21 was a 25% increase. If you go from 20 to 24, it's 45% plus. So 45% of the dollars that have ever been in existence have come into existence in the last 4 years. And I would imagine, Sam, it's chasing your family just like the three of ours at the supermarket. I passed up buying a new vehicle, new or used, 2 years ago because of how expensive they were. Now I wish I had. Because it's only increased in the rise of cost. Honestly, I was just talking with a coworker about that, looking at the same vehicles he got 2 years ago, and it's about a 30 to 35% increase in just those 2 years. So that's the problem the three of us are feeling. We think probably you are feeling it now. Where I would be really I would want to say this for all of our listeners, Sam, and for you. We think, talking with you and talking with our listeners, we can generally all agree that there is a real world problem with fiat currencies, including our own US dollar. That does not make the first proffered solution or any one single proffered solution a solution. I always thought of that when voting at the state level for proposals. Proposal 7, Proposal 9, Proposal 15. A lot of people seem to think like, I don't know if I'm going to go left or right. And my basis for that was like, can you prove to me there's a problem? What's your proposed solution? And to the best of our ability, what do we think the consequences of your proposed solution will be? Can we think of any possible unintended consequences, this type of thing? But can we start at the level of an agreement that there is a problem? And that's maybe where I would ask you, do you feel in the conversations you follow with technology and maybe politics, do you have a keen sense yourself that what is happening to the US dollar is not just sort of something happening in the air, but is something happening precisely because of our monetary and fiscal policies?
I think that there are huge problems within the American economy related to price and cost.
Yeah.
And that this is something that has not been focused on nearly enough. It's coming to the fore a little bit more now. I think a lot of the traditional markers of the economy that people pay attention to have not included the cost of things. And while, I hate going to Chick-fil-A and paying $12 for a combo meal, right? The real problems are in housing, healthcare. Those are the two big ones off the top of my head, right? Where like prices are just destroying people. And, paying $2 more for a burger isn't going to break your bank, but having to pay another $120,000 for a house will. There's huge problems in the American economy related to cost. And I think it's going to be a big point in the upcoming election this year.
So we would say, and we'd have to demonstrate to you, and it'd be a whole show now, but that Bitcoin is uniquely suited to address these as a better technology. Now, better technologies admittedly can always be and should be eventually usurped by better technologies still, right? So it's not that this has to be some sort of be all end all, but that we see it as being better than that. And some primary things there, Sam, are simply, and you heard it if you've listened to our episodes till now, or you've just heard it by studying Bitcoin. So insofar as you have, is that it's fixed supply. And how can we demonstrate that it is fixed supply? That has to do with the block mining subsidy or reward, and it can be checked on this ledger, which is visible for everybody. And you even pointed that out. We can check the reward. Does it remain consistent? It does. Every 210,000 blocks, which is roughly every 4 years, does that subsidy reward get cut in half? And can we parse that math out every 4 years to the point where it diminishes to essentially nothing, right? And from that, can we see demonstrated that it is on a supply issuance that's decreasing regularly, and that decrease points to a total of 21 million ever. And our understanding is that we can see that, and that as a technological feature does in fact solve a real world problem. And the real world problem being where others are creating more dollars, more measurement units. Those measurement units are not going to everybody equally. And they're particularly not coming to folks like us. And as those dollars are being infused irregularly and by selection here and there, it distorts whole markets. It distorts housing markets, or is a portion of why the housing markets are distorted. I have college kids, Sam. We say right now, as we have 2 college kids. We'll have 2 in college this fall. Talk about no dollars. I don't know anymore the value or the cost of college. The value is in question right now. And we've just seen a new round of federal student loan forgiveness. How much does it cost? I don't know whether to tell my kid to avoid loans or to lever up. I don't know anymore, because they chose a winner and a loser, and therefore even the whole college proposition is now distorted for a parent or parents like us. And I say that. I hope nobody thinks that's some sort of parlor trick to say that. Like, these are family discussions, like we're literally having,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have a friend who had their loans forgiven, and he said, I was a little afraid to tell you. I thought you'd hate it. And I said, I hate that it's happening, but I'm glad it's happening for you. I guess I could be duplicitous like that, right? Because I am back to the 2020 checks that we got from the government. I said about those, Sam, on an episode, I said, I hated that they were doing it. And yet when those checks came, I wanted to cash it out and put it cash on my bed and swim through it like Scrooge McDuck, we just got that. So we would say that it comes down to this: the real world problem that it solves is that central banks have the ability to, in a dishonest way, increase money supply. Even if we said to ourselves collectively at the beginning, we'll never do it, temptation has led us to where we do it. And now it's not just temptation. Now it seems like an addiction. It's a numbers addiction. Like, we seem to have to do it. The whole system is built on that. but that really distorts markets and hurts individuals. Why? Because we want to get our paychecks not only to pay for things in the moment, but to plan for the future. And it's hard to do that. There aren't vehicles that allow us to hold dollars. And instead, we have to spend it now. Spend that whole push to spend now also leads to disposable, as opposed to kind of saving up for a higher quality lifetime purchase. So that would be my offer to you and listener Sam. And we've probably got a half an hour in on just number one. There is a real world problem. That's our contention, or that's what we would say, that dollars are being actively debased at an accelerated rate now. Part of that, like our payments on our interest payment alone as a nation now exceed education, healthcare individually, both of those as individual buckets. They also exceed defense as a bucket, and it seems to only be growing. So there you go. What do you think about that, Sam?
I think that we talked about before the podcast, I think, about rating the question, the responses, like a judge at the Olympics.
Sure.
And I think on one hand, I could give you an 8, right? As like, that was a great response. But it touches on something that is like a different set of questions that I have. And that most of the use case for Bitcoin and most of the way that it's talked about and utilized is Bitcoin as a commodity, Bitcoin as like a digital version of gold, or as like a different kind of tech stock, as opposed to as a currency. And so I think it's worth having a conversation about whether or not Bitcoin is a currency or a commodity, in the sense that I think that if you want to treat Bitcoin as a commodity, there's a lot of great examples of that, right? I put my dollars in today so that I can get more dollars tomorrow or in the future. Then you can talk about, okay, well, is Bitcoin the right commodity as opposed to any other kind of investable asset that you think is going to rise over time? Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
Jared, I think so. So,
Jared, go.
All three of us here. So I think this gets to two of the questions that you had shared before, right? The sort of fluctuation in prices, but also isn't this just a way to get more dollars? And I want to acknowledge, I think that today, right now, in some ways, you're very right that in the current world we live in, you are buying Bitcoin to get more dollars in the future. That it's an exchange sort of rate. And so I'm not going to pretend like that's not how it is today. And so you're right when you say that. I think what I would offer to you is sort of there's the aspirational goal, right? What we want it to be, what it's slated to be versus how it functions today and where we are in the stages of adoption. So when you think about money, I think this is a good point to talk about this. What is good money? Money is a medium of exchange, right? So it can be exchanged for goods, for services. People desire it to have it. So I can go to Starbucks, I can give them my $5 and they're going to give me some coffee back. It's a unit of account. So it's how I denominate things. So when you go to the stock market and you look at the price of Apple, it's denominated in dollars, right? It's not denominated in hours. It's not denominated in rocks. It's denominated in dollars.
Right. Yeah.
And then the third thing it does is that store of value. And so we would say that Bitcoin is the best money because it does all three of those things well. Now, does that mean that I can go to McDonald's right now and pay with Bitcoin to buy my McDonald's? Not in the same way that is so simple and easy that I can with dollars, right? That it is very true to say that in today's world, we live in a dollar-dominant world. And not just in the United States, I mean, literally across the world. You can basically take dollars and get whatever you want. But we would say that the things that the dollar does not well, Bitcoin does so much better. So is the dollar a great medium of exchange? Absolutely. You can take it anywhere. Is it a great unit of account? Sure. It's divisible. There's different values to it. Absolutely. Is it a good store of value? Absolutely not. It's one of the worst, right? That if we did this on one of those episodes, right? We looked at, if I bought $100, if it's a store of value, I want it to be able to be worth $100 in a long amount of time, and it's not. That's the problem. And that's where Bitcoin comes in and is better at that. And so in some ways today, yes, it is treated as a way to get more dollars because that's the world and the system we're living in. But I'm sure you've heard of places like El Salvador that have declared Bitcoin as legal tender there. And so now every place there has to accept Bitcoin as tender as a legal currency is. And so it's one of these, we would like to say that we're early in that way, that even though it's been around for 10-ish years or so, that this is just the beginning of what could be a lot more. That even though it might function not as much of a dollar-like thing now, that the long-term goal is that eventually, yes, the world will be a medium of exchange where so many people are using Bitcoin that the value doesn't actually fluctuate as much. That is much more stable. That you can go every place and exchange, your Bitcoin for McDonald's, for Starbucks, and that it will continue to do that store of value stuff too. And so even though we can say all that, there are some things and ways that it's happening today. Now, I would be remiss. I'm not going to make it more glorious than it is. It's very difficult to do that. So there's a few apps that you can use to that'll convert your Bitcoin right into dollars, and then you can spend it. But because we live in the dollar denominated world, you have to use dollars, right? Yeah. And there's the Gemini credit card, Coinbase, Fold, right? Yep. So I use Fold. Yep. They allow you to do that too. They call it push to card, so you can sell some of your Bitcoin. But perhaps the biggest problem to that too is the way that the government treats Bitcoin, right? So the government taxes it like a commodity. And so that means every time that I spend or convert my Bitcoin into dollars, sell it for US dollars, if I have to pay taxable gains. So whether that's short term or long term, the incentives in the world we live in today do not incentivize anyone to really live on a complete, what we would call a Bitcoin standard. And so in some ways you're right, but I think we would say to you, that doesn't mean that it's not worth what we think it could be. That it's yes, but this is where it's going, and this is what it will be someday. Now, don't ask me when. Don't ask me when I think it's going to happen, because the ways in which currencies have changed, even throughout history, hasn't been necessarily a linear process, right? I mean, even the dollar used to be backed by gold, right? That wasn't like we all saw it coming, that one day it wasn't going to be backed by gold. It was a thing that happened, one time sort of moment. When silver transitioned to gold or stuff like that took time. And eventually it became apparent that this was the new currency, that this is what people were preferring to use. And so we like to think that the natural incentives that Bitcoin has, the problems that it solves, the fact that it is just better money overall, that with the right amount of time, and assuming that none of these sort of doomsday things happen, that eventually it will rise to the top, that it will just eat, if you want to use that language, that it'll eat all other currencies because it is just a better thing.
Jared.
And so when we think about all that stuff, that's how I would sort of answer that sort of question. I'd let Ben and David, do you want to go ahead and respond or add anything to that?
Real briefly, thank you. I love that you got to those three, because that does sum it up really well. What does it mean, Sam, for it to be have a great unit of account and medium of exchange if it's a terrible store of value? And that is precisely the problem right now with the US dollar. It's a terrible store of value in an inflationary environment. It's a terrible store of value. Spend your dollars right now, because they won't be worth as many tomorrow. spend it all right now, live hand to foot, never be incentivized to really save those dollars. And as things become more expensive, you're also chasing the dollars now as well, because eggs and milk and gas and all the above. So Bitcoin admittedly is more juvenile, but it's starting with the right one first. And Jared gave us the order, a very natural order for the conversation, but you want your money to be a good store of value, and then to grow up to also be a unit of account and a medium of exchange. And there's signs that Bitcoin is growing in that direction, and there's new technologies and people helping to slowly make that happen. We're just so used to the opposite, is what I would say. Ben?
Yeah, my only thought is I totally agree with what Jared was saying. We're not there yet. Bitcoin is not legal tender in the United States. It is in some places like El Salvador. But I think even where Bitcoin is right now, and where Bitcoin has been for, say, the last, for me, 8 years, it's ridiculous how little money I put into Bitcoin and how much it's worth today. And I will happily pay, and I declare on my US tax returns every year that I own cryptocurrency. I will happily, and every time I've sold, I have declared it to the United States government. I will happily pay them 20% of my earnings, because the earnings are just, I mean, they're stupid. How much Bitcoin has increased in value over against any other investment out there. Bitcoin is the best investment over the last 10 years by I mean, just ridiculous amounts of percentage over the S&P index fund or any other hedge fund. So for me, even if you can afford to throw $100 at it, it's a fun and frankly, it's kind of a crazy experiment just to see what a little investment could end up like down the road in the long term.
And then I'll just wrap that up for my part. And then Sam, you can tell us whether we're still here or whether we're moving on. But I don't see it as speculating in the area of Bitcoin, Sam. I don't. Or even buying Bitcoin. I've often framed it and feel most comfortable framing it in exchanging a leaky currency for one that is strong. Like literally, I cannot save up dollars in such a way as to outcompete inflation. Think of the young people, back to your millennials, who are said, hey, you want to buy a house? First, Dave Ramsey says, save up 20% down payment. In the last 4 years, has any millennial been able to save up 20% before that 20% got melted away by home prices that went up 50% to 100%? You can't right now. And so, again, that's a great demonstration that there is a problem. We have these leaky dollars. And for me, I feel like I'm swapping out the lesser thing for the stronger thing. And Jared talked about that in terms of the one eating the other or growing up. And that's what Ben talked about just now in terms of stupid gains. It's because the one's not leaky. And insofar as it's not leaky and people are looking to jump the leaky boat for a solid boat, the more people do that then increases the value of the Bitcoin. And that's the upside that Ben is speaking of and that I have experienced also.
I think all of you made some great points, but that you're essentially making the case for why Bitcoin is digital gold. And digital gold is not a great currency to use as a currency because it suffers all the exact same problems that we just talked about. Now, so what I'm hearing from you is there's a possibility in the future that Bitcoin could be used much more like a currency today as an exchange for goods and services. For any of the things that we talked about, right? I think Jared talked about things being measured in rocks, right? Or popsicle sticks or whatever. You could use all those things and call it a currency, right? Like if you take it somewhere and convert it into dollars, there's going to be whatever friction that's going to take. Now, specifically on the currency point, though, now correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that as Bitcoin grows and as there are more transactions, the blockchain gets longer because it's recording every transaction ever. Yes?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. I have heard, no, I don't, I have not experienced this myself, but that there is a lag time between starting a transaction and having it complete.
Yep.
Based on the processing of that.
Yep.
So what is that? Is it, do you number it in, is it as much as like 10 minutes? I think I've heard.
Yeah, Sam. So the average
Or longer.
Or longer.
So there is a new block mined on average every 10 minutes. If we were to actually look at the blockchain together, sometimes it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then you'll have a couple of those, and then it'll be 20, 25 minutes to the next. But on average, it's every 10 minutes. And then there's the reward for not only mining it, and they should get a reward, right? They bought the hardware, they bought the container that it's in, or, but ultimately they bought the hardware, they're supplying the electricity. There should be a reward, but there can be a long line of people wanting to get their transaction in the next block. And so fees are assessed. There's rising, sometimes fees are a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but you can also increase your own fee, Sam, and listeners, to get to the head of the line, right? So you can do that. But even then, you're bumping into a conversation we have not yet had in this podcast, which is, it is true that Bitcoin on what's called the base chain here really still can only handle so many transactions per second, if you're to average it out per second.
Yeah.
Those per second transactions happen in batches on average every 10 minutes, but still it's not enough to carry all of the physical transactions worldwide, which is why, and this is actually going to play into, you've done your homework, Sam, when you say it acts a lot like digital gold, right? It does act like digital gold. It would be hard to go to the grocery store and pay in gold. Do I have to have gold and, like a little hacksaw with me? Because I don't know how many groceries I got. My wife sent me with one list, but then I saw the ho-hos and added those. And I enjoy bourbon, so I sprung for a bottle of bourbon tonight. And so I cut off a chunk of gold. That'd be terrible. In fact, we've created different layers of money on top of gold, back to when things were pegged to gold. We had, in fact, once upon a time, we had promissory notes called the US dollar, which were convertible for actual gold. They weren't just full faith and credit of the US government. Bitcoin is shaping up to be like that, Sam, just to be fully transparent with you. The base layer is Bitcoin itself. As adoption increases, it will become less reasonable to say that, and then ultimately impossible to say, hey, half the world's population is on Bitcoin and everybody's doing all their daily transactions on it. Suddenly, the chicken sandwich at Chick-fil-A that costs $2 more isn't your problem, Sam. It's getting the transaction to go through, right? That's your problem now, to use your example from earlier. And that's why people very actively right now are building what's called layer twos on top of that. And that has been the history of money since the beginning, is that money has always been layered. You've got the thing that anchors everything at the bottom. It has great properties, but it also has, part of its greatness are also some of its drawbacks from day to day. To secure it, and to make sure it's secure, it doesn't have all the properties that are needed for all of daily life. And so another layer of money is built on top of that. People are doing that right now, Sam, with like Lightning Network. There's some other technologies that I won't name now. It's all fledgling, admittedly. It is fledgling. This is, we've gotten to the East Coast of America, and now we're slowly pushing off west, and it's new land, it's new territory. It's also new opportunity, if I can frame it that way, right? You and I, the four of us in our lifetimes, maybe aren't used to the settling of the West when it comes to money. We haven't experienced that before until now. And just because people are running off west probably doesn't mean we should either. A lot of fools are headed out that way also. And yet some are headed out for principled reasons and with a good plan. And that's for you to measure. That's part of what this conversation is right here.
I think
saying that to a guy who's moving back east, kind of funny. So sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think those are all fair. It's interesting that one of the things that people who are in favor of Bitcoin love is the decentralized nature of it. Yet, in order for Bitcoin to function like a currency as it is proffered, it needs centralized services in order to do that. And so, I didn't know that there were services that were going to act as Bitcoin middlemen, so that I don't even know how that would work. But and we don't need to get into. You called it level 2, layer 2.
Layer 2. Yep.
Yeah, layer 2. We don't have to get into that right now. That sounds really interesting for me to go read about. But I do want to point out the irony that in order for Bitcoin to act like a currency, it needs centralized control.
I would disagree with that. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you listening well. I think that the base layer, the idea of there only being 21 million Bitcoin ever, that is such a unique thing. And I think that there are lots of ways that you could probably say, well, Bitcoin isn't great at this and Bitcoin isn't great at this. But that one thing, that it's a stable, a very sound, very hard money supply, harder even frankly than gold. It could be compared to digital gold, but gold, we don't know how much there is of that. People are still finding it, right? And governments that are deeply invested in mining it, they may or may not have disclosed how much they have in that one hill over there. The issuance of gold is much less certain than Bitcoin. And so at this, especially at this one thing, at the base layer of a fixed monetary supply, that is such a unique idea that frankly the world has never experienced. And I think that reason alone is worth letting Bitcoin at least be something that we give very serious consideration to. And frankly, it actually even challenges. It's not just an interesting option over here. I mean, Bitcoin is coming for US dollars. That is, and for all fiat currencies, that is the reason that it was created. And so it may even not be something that people can avoid for long. Now that sounds like that's kind of threatening, but that is the purpose for which Bitcoin was created, was to kind of come after these fiat currencies. So we can probably afford to avoid it for a little longer, but
yeah,
I don't know. That's turning up the heat a little bit, but what?
No, please ask.
I was going to ask. So if Bitcoin isn't the perfect money, it's not quite as easy to use as currency, and maybe it will be someday, but because it's not perfect, would that prevent you from using it for its most intended use case?
If you're asking, would I use Bitcoin as currency?
No, I'm asking if you would use Bitcoin as a commodity.
Oh, I could see using Bitcoin as a commodity. I don't really have a problem with using Bitcoin as a commodity, but it's labeled as a currency, and I don't see the practical use of it as a currency either now or in, I would say, the near to mid future. I have no idea what's going to happen. I think that there's a worthwhile conversation to talk about whether or not nations that have nukes are going to allow a cryptocurrency to take away their fiat powers with money.
It's a great question.
And whether or not that would actually work.
Bitcoin doesn't have nukes.
Bitcoin does not have nukes. So one thing I didn't talk about myself is my deep fascination with biblical nihilism. And nihilism posits, right, that ultimately it doesn't matter what truth is, the only thing that remains is power. And I think in this conversation, specifically in US dollar versus Bitcoin, Bitcoin has a lot of interesting aspects to it, but it has no power to enforce any of that. Whereas the US government has a lot of real world power to enforce things.
True.
There also
Absolutely.
is, I think, a power in the opt-in network, and this is the crazy use case of the internet. Is you can ignore the internet. You don't need the internet to live, but it is ridiculously powerful. And as more people opt in, Metcalfe's law says that the network is more valuable, and I would even say more powerful as more people adopt it. And so the power that Bitcoin has is because, frankly, already the sheer number of people that have opted into this network that, in 2013, when Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road were using it, you could definitely afford to ignore it and to just treat it like, who cares? But it's come a long way since then.
Yeah.
So someone that I listen to talks about Bitcoin trading or going up and down based on its value of future adoption, right? That's the sort of value way why it goes up and down. And I think that's helpful. That I don't think we would say that that's a problem, right? Just because of the way in which these things like a currency change happen. We call it the Bitcoin Reformation Podcast because we think it's that big of a change, right? That just like Luther's day was a huge societal change, a huge shift in the way church happened and was centralized, all that sort of stuff. We think is the same way here. And that just like, we could disagree about when the Reformation started, if it was really, the 95 Theses or some other time, but that it took, lots of time, and it's still theoretically rippling through the world, what happened. And so in the same way, we're early in this, right? That it's a ripple effect that's just kind of begun. And there's a lot of interesting, I would say, game theory, about who, if big nation states adopt it, because then suddenly it's like hey, I need to run and get some of this too. And just all these sort of different what if situations
For sure.
that really sort of speak to the future adoption of what it is and what it could be.
We're at about an hour now, and so I want to honor y'all's time. I can keep going. I've got some more questions, but the last thing I would want to say about Bitcoin as currency, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse on this issue, but for me, this is one of the primary things about Bitcoin that it does not fulfill its proffered promise on, is the huge fluctuation. Jared, you talked about the three aspects of currency, one of them being a store of value. And I actually see that as a huge negative for Bitcoin, in that it does not store value, it increases in value, which, like any asset, that's fine and good for an asset. But for a currency, you want to know, how much am I going to spend for this latte? And over time, we could say, yeah, Bitcoin has been up and to the right. But on any given day or any given season, you might be experiencing huge trampoline jumps in prices, so that I expect the latte to cost me what would be, let's say, $5. But then I go and I swipe my card, and it actually costs me $14 because that's where the market was at that day, which is just another kind of me again kicking the dead horse of Bitcoin is not a good currency.
And
yeah,
I mean,
it's not sure
I don't
to
think
that.
there's
Yeah,
much for us to
I'll
say,
agree with
right?
you.
That
Yeah,
you're
I
right.
don't disagree with it. I don't use Bitcoin to buy lattes, but saving Bitcoin over a couple of years and saving my down payment on my house, that was a pretty good use case.
I will
Sure.
say this.
Yeah, absolutely. Again,
I will say this. We won't be able to technically get into this. Maybe Sam offline, I can show this to you sometime. Particularly Jack Mallers and his company Strike has shown very nicely how Bitcoin is not only something you can invest in, but Bitcoin is also both a protocol and financial rails that currencies can be sent across. And so how I describe that. I can, using Zelle or PayPal or Venmo, right, send you, like right now, some cash, right? And yet there's this middleman company in between us. And what their actual settlement time is behind the scenes, I don't know, quite frankly, Sam. I don't know. And again, there's middleman in between us. We can also use the Bitcoin protocol and network to send currencies to each other. This has to do with the remittance payments over Bitcoin rails, where what's between us is those rails, but it's not an individual person. It's not an individual government or corporation. It is the whole group of Bitcoiners running nodes, running mining machines. It's the whole ecosystem that hangs together. And it is final, instant settlement between you and me. Again, PayPal, Venmo feels final to us. Our credit cards feel final to us. In fact, it takes 30 to 45 days for that type of technology to actually settle. And back to actually the credit card one, there's fees involved, right? People who run shops know that. I happen to be the director of development, which is to say fundraising for a nonprofit. Boy, we know that. And let me just share that with you. I am eager for the day when Bitcoin as Rails becomes a more common, developed, matured use of sending currency, because it would absolutely cut out a middleman and reduce fees in a very meaningful way for the nonprofit I serve. It would be a very meaningful thing. It will be. How about I use that word? It will be, or that phrase.
Yeah.
For the local restaurant, the mom and pop shop here and there. Those are meaningful advancements that's coming. It's not just a cutting out of Western Union for remittance payments, but this ecosystem is maturing to where it's also true that our fiat dollars can be sent across the network with pennies, fractions of pennies on the dollar, as opposed to 2 to 3 to 5% fees being there. So that's coming. I'm watching for that. And again, what would be a very meaningful way? It would be meaningful also, I'll say this, to churches when it comes to donations, automatic donations from their members. More of them would get on board with it. So there are real world uses that are nearly here and coming. But I'll admit that without them being fully developed yet, you being the principled skeptic that you are, I can respect it. I really can.
Yeah, I'm going to be snarky and say pennies on the dollar is at least 2, and 2% of a dollar is 2 pennies.
Yeah. I got
That's
that wrong. I
just
should have said fractions of pennies, but good on you.
I would also
Sam,
say
one more thing.
Jared.
When I think about this, as far as the currency stuff, I think about some people call about it our financial privilege as United States dollar people. You know, that we can have a real choice in this, right? And so like it's not that way today for us, and we can kind of debate about, well, it is and it isn't, it's more of a commodity. I wouldn't, if you're a reader, I would go read Alex Gladstein's Check Your Financial Privilege, I think is what it's called. Yep. And so he's the director for the Human Rights Foundation. And this book talks about how Bitcoin helps people in places not like the United States who need it, right? That they need it as a currency. And even if the value is not stable, that because they can have it and they're protected from their government that's inflating currencies hundreds of percent, that women who can't technically own money can have this Bitcoin as a currency, that is invaluable to them and life-changing. And so even if I would posit that it doesn't necessarily look like a currency for us in our Western financially privileged world that we live in as United States citizens who have the best dollar, the best of the worst, right? For other people around the world, Bitcoin is a real currency now because they just need it to be what it is, and they don't have the same option that we do. And I'll say this though, that what else blockchain does, we don't usually talk about this stuff, but digital dollars are one of the most craved and desired for things in the third world that people want to exchange. If they don't want Bitcoin, the next thing they want is dollars because it's better than whatever they have too. And so even if that kind of plays against our argument of what Bitcoin is, it still is sort of this, hey, digitalization of the future. We think Bitcoin is the best version of that. Hey, I need something other than my local currency because there's a lot less trust in other things. If you're doing digital dollars, you got to trust the companies that produce those, but that it's a real thing for people who are around the world who absolutely don't have what we have here in the United States.
That's a great point. We definitely, if I had to wait 20 minutes for my transaction to go through before I knew if I could leave the store, right, that would be such a headache in America. But those sorts of things in a country that is not nearly as privileged or as wealthy are definitely things that are huge considerations and worthwhile. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
While you look up
so I got two more buckets.
Yeah, go
Can
ahead.
you tell me if we got time to do those buckets or what do you want to do?
We got time.
Okay. All right. So I've got the environmental and societal impact and crap hitting the fan. So the environmental and societal impact of Bitcoin is the one place where I'm not ambivalent about Bitcoin, but like I actively dislike it. And the impact of Bitcoin environmentally and societally is something where I would be actually like in favor of getting rid of Bitcoin altogether. And I understand that it was developed in 2008, right? And it has a proof of work concept as opposed to a proof of state concept that other cryptocurrencies or other blockchain style items are involving. But I think that the proof of work required the computational power and especially the electrical usage that is being subsidized, at least here in the United States, and that's kind of all I'm talking about, is being subsidized by the common person for Bitcoin mining operations is something that I really strongly dislike. I don't know if I hate it, but I strongly dislike it.
Well, here's some good news, Sam.
Okay.
You should change your opinion on that because there has been a significant amount of research just in the last 6 months. 9 months, fall of 2023. Cornell and Cambridge Cambridge University in the UK has done a tremendous amount of research on the electricity usage of Bitcoin. And Cornell got involved as well. These are not slouch institutions. These are world-class academic, serious institutions that probably as objective as what an organization could be. Academics, to their credit, can research. They're trained to research things and to withhold their opinion. So they realized there was a big study that came out in September, October 2023 that actually they changed their mind. They said Bitcoin is actually good for the environment. Now that sounds crazy, right? Because there have been so many headlines that have said Bitcoin was terrible for the environment. And there's all kinds of US politicians saying that, lots of people parroting that. And I'm not dogging on you, but because I think that there are a lot of people that believe Bitcoin is bad for the environment, and therefore we should be morally opposed to it. And I will grant that if Bitcoin was just absolutely horrible for the environment, even if it was a sounder money, that might be a significant reason to say we should actually like militate against Bitcoin, because the environment is worth something. Now there would be a lot of debate about that, but
Sure.
but here's how Cornell and Cambridge can say what they said, that Bitcoin is actually net good for the environment, and that their report actually got picked up by KPMG, which is the largest auditing firm in the country, in the United States. And from there, it was publicized by Forbes, and it was picked up by BlackRock, the largest United States hedge fund. And in the hedge fund world, in the investment world, there's this big debate about ESG. So the idea is, if you're going to invest in something, even if it's a good return for your money, does it cause harm to the environment? Does it cause harm to society? Or does it cause problems for governance? And so ESG has become a really popular thing to talk about in the investment world, to really to make a moral case for these investments. It acts a bit as a hedge on raw capitalism. And so BlackRock, KPMG, Cambridge, Cornell all came out and said, actually, from our research, Bitcoin is good for the environment. Those are ridiculously powerful institutions that are coming out and saying this. Why would they do that? Here's why Bitcoin can be good for the environment. You're absolutely right that proof of work does take a lot of electricity, and I would say that if Bitcoin ever changes from a proof of work cryptocurrency to a proof of stake cryptocurrency, I'm out, and probably most Bitcoiners will be out as well, because proof of stake, what proof of stake does is it incentivizes those that already have lots of the cryptocurrency, and under proof of stake, you cannot have a fixed fixed unit. So all proof of stake cryptocurrencies have an inflating number of units, and that would be the exact opposite of what we've been arguing is the single most interesting use case of Bitcoin. So proof of work is really important to Bitcoin and to its future. So the question is proof of work bad for the environment? Well, KPMG and all these said actually no, and here's why they said Bitcoin is not bad for the environment. First, Bitcoin has actually incentivized Bitcoin miners to find cheap electricity. So there's a real incentive to get your electricity at a cheaper cost. Well, how do you get a cheaper electricity? You find sustainable electricity, right? So if you have access to a hydroelectric dam that is sustainable, your cost basis for that electricity is going to be cheaper. And so it has incentivized miners to go out and find the cheapest forms of electricity. That's one. There's another one that we'll talk about, but David has a thought.
And maybe you're going to throw it, so forgive me if I'm stealing your thunder, and stranded energy, Sam. Stranded energy. So what's amazing, go ahead, Ben. Go ahead, Ben. I'll let you go then.
Good. So okay, so sustainable energy is really important, right? So let's think about windmills. you've driven around, you've seen the big white windmills, right? They're everywhere.
There's a windmill factory here in Colorado near where I live.
That's awesome. There are tons of windmills just east of me in Illinois, across the farm fields of Illinois, and those windmills, they run quite a bit of time. The problem with the windmill is actually that it creates too much electricity. I don't know if as I started getting into this report, they talked about stranded electricity or the problems with sustainable electricity. There's actually reasons why some less developed countries don't have just gobs of windmills all over the place, or why they haven't yet installed hydroelectric dams. And it's not because it's just cost prohibitive to build the windmill. The problem is actually that if you would let a windmill run all the time, it creates more electricity than what can actually be used. And so what Bitcoin miners connected to these more sustainable forms of electricity generation have enabled these energy producers to do is it regulates the amount of electricity. So when there's a huge demand, and like on Christmas Vacation, when Chevy Chase turns on his house, and the electric bills go flying, and there's like sirens going off, and then they hit the switch and they restore the. So if there's a huge draw for electricity, then these Bitcoin miners actually shut off, and they let the full amount of electricity into the grid. But most of the time, there's actually not enough draw for that electricity to be at full used capacity. And so in a lot of times, what will happen if there's not a Bitcoin miner connected to it, that energy will just get used up. It'll get burned up. It doesn't do anything, right?
Sure.
But when you connect it to a Bitcoin miner, where this electricity would otherwise just be thrown to the wind or whatever, the Bitcoin miners can use it to generate their Bitcoin. And so it actually incentivizes then energy producers to install more sustainable energy sources. And it actually can act as a switch between when the electricity is needed and when it's not. And it can soak up all of this stranded or wasted electricity that would otherwise not get used. David, is that kind of where you were going? And
that is absolutely one of them. If I can make one sub point, which goes way back, and I don't hear you saying this, Sam, but if we're concerned about electricity use in the environment, there are some who say the real fix to all this is to get rid of humanity. It's actually a anti-humanitarian argument. I do not believe you're coming remotely close to making that sort of demand, because we, particularly as Christians, creedal Christians, knowing a God who created us, redeemed us, sustains us, are not anti-human. We understand precisely that though all of creation was good, it was very good when then man and woman were created. So we're not suggesting that. You're not. We're not.
Right.
We can also trace through, this is the last little run-up I would do, and say, what's the biggest advancement for humanity in the last 200 to 300 years? And I did this with my children, literally at the table one night, named several interesting small technologies. It turns out, though, that we're back to base layers and building on top of base layers actually now, right? Kind of a second layer. A lot of our technologies are second layer on top of the biggest advancement in the last 200 to 300 years, which is our ability to harness energy and all of the goods that have come for that, for you and me, our children, our neighbors, and people around the world. So there's harnessing energy, and in this case, electricity. It's been good for humanity. And if we really want some third world countries to become developed countries like us, we also have to actually be not just open, but pro finding more electricity. We can say, hey, as we're getting more electricity, let's do it cleanly. But we can't say we're done. We've topped out on electricity production in the world. That would also be, that would put us back in our privilege while not wanting those same privileges for our worldwide neighbors, right? So we want more electricity demand. And on the road to that, it's really fascinating. As Ben has pointed out, Bitcoin miners are soaking up stranded energy, which helps financialize the production of the energy, which actually can help reduce the local cost to local consumers. They've done that. They're helping build out electrical grids in new areas, because you can't build out 10% of a hope for grid and then another 10% and another 10%. If you build in some places incrementally, it costs orders of magnitude more to actually reach where you want to get to. And so in some cases, Sam, they're building out the larger grids that they know they'll need 10, 15, 20 years from now, soaking up the immediate stranded energy while allowing for that growth to happen later. That's one. And then one you didn't even get into, Ben, and this is just one of many examples, Sam, is one of the biggest places where Bitcoin miners are being deployed right now is across the American West at oil fields. Instead of flaring off natural gases that are too expensive to capture, they're putting mini turbines on top. They're burning the off gases, which are predominantly things like methane and natural gas. And they are admittedly releasing CO2, but it's a much less, what's the word, pernicious gas compared to the gas that they're otherwise flaring out. Even when you see a flame on top of a well, it's burning about 15% to 20% of the gases. Another 80 to 85% are escaping. They're harmful. So they're putting turbines on top to produce local electricity to run miners right there. This helps the oil company. It actually helps the environment. It secures the Bitcoin network further. So these are just some, so we've talked a little bit of background philosophy. We're not anti-human. Ben has introduced the idea of soaking up a lot of excess electricity, even building out. But now all these beautiful little individual use cases where it's actually helping the greater environment, even though admittedly, Sam, it's leading to what? It's leading to a world with greater electricity production and greater electricity consumption. But that's been the story now for the last 200 years plus, or 100 years plus.
One other thing that I would throw out, and then we'll throw it back to you, Sam. So there has been a question of just how much electricity is Bitcoin using. So we've talked about sustainable energy and all this kind of stuff. It turns out there have been some really bad, false, outlandish claims about the amount of electricity that Bitcoin is taking up. There was even famously a headline that said that Bitcoin would soak up all of the world's electricity by I think 2020 or something. Well, obviously that's not true. So Bitcoin actually, it turns out, uses about the amount of electricity of the world's tumble dryers. So I appreciate using a dryer. I would defend my right to dry my clothes, not by hanging them outside. We don't have a clothesline. I appreciate having a dryer. And I don't think that that's an insane use of electricity for me and my family. So the world's population that have tumble dryers, that's about the approximate equivalent of the electricity use of Bitcoin right now. And even if Bitcoin's, it will continue to eat up more electricity. That's the idea of proof of work, and it gets more difficult and it takes more electricity as proof of work goes along. It's still, we don't know how much electricity the rest of the world's economic system takes up. I mean, if you counted up all the electricity of banks, of the lights at banks, of all the different kinds of monetary systems, it's way more electricity right now. We don't have a way to even count it. Bitcoin has a much more stable way of accounting for its electricity usage. So it's still, compared to the fiat system, it's still just a microcosm of the amount of electricity. So thoughts on what we threw back at you?
I think that one of my first thoughts to what you said, are y'all familiar with the television show The Office?
Sure.
Love it.
There is a quote in one of the early seasons where Michael is showing everybody a movie in the office, and his boss comes in, Jan, and I've pulled up the quote. She says, "How would a movie increase productivity, Michael? How on earth would it do that, Michael? People work faster after. Magically? No, they have to make up for the time they lost watching the movie." And I hear what you're saying about the renewable energy, but that is very much like, so because Bitcoin is terrible, and when I talk about, I'm specifically thinking power grids that people are paying into, and my electricity bill goes up because there is increased usage on the power grid to mine coins.
Why does your cost go up if there's Bitcoin miners using some of that electricity?
Because of how much electricity that they can use. Large Bitcoin mining operations can be a huge drain, which then demand and supply affect price. So price can go up.
I mean, that's theoretically possible. I would say that would largely depend municipality to municipality and how particular Bitcoiners are using. If they're just using municipal electricity, yeah, that's probably right. But
Right.
the cost basis for regular municipal electricity will eventually push Bitcoiners out of business.
Yes. Yeah. There is, I don't know if it's a famous story, but I remember reading it last year about a Bitcoin mining operation in Texas where I think it was the city of Dallas or something like that, paid them several tens of millions of dollars to stop mining because there was a massive heat wave, and they needed that capacity on the grid. And I look at that and I shake my head and I go, that's crazy. This is
I love it,
now
Sam.
if the argument is we're going to build new grids and we're going to use cheaper sustainable energy, and by doing that we're going to increase demand for better sustainable energy, and that is going to be a net positive for like everybody else. Oh, that's great. That sounds wonderful. That kind of sounds like this is a future of what Bitcoin can be, more so than like what is true today across the entire industry.
Well, the only thing that I would say, Sam, is that if KPMG, BlackRock, Cambridge, and Cornell say that Bitcoin is good for the environment, that there's something to that. I don't think they're just making it up.
No, I don't think they're making it up either, but I think that they're looking at the possible future of what it can be than what it is today. And maybe Bitcoin, again, becomes much more currency style useful in the future. And maybe its production doesn't cost different people on different power grids more money or more problems or whatever for those things. But I do think that is a not irrelevant thing that is occurring.
I don't think it's I think it's not irrelevant. I find Bitcoin's energy use, Sam, actually to be really exciting. And not just passable. So for whatever it's worth, to kind of seed your imagination, you're on the skeptic side. I'm not like, I haven't gone from skeptic to passable. I'm like excited about what Bitcoin is doing worldwide. Again, it's helping. Let's go to those financially places that lack the privilege we have. It's helping build out electricity for people who prior to now did not have it available to them. And that has to do with human flourishing. That has to do with longer lives, less loss of life. Go to Texas. You did one of their heat in the middle of heat when they needed more electricity. The Texas grid, its name is ERCOT. It has happened now several times since, particularly in cold storms as well. So both in the summertime and in the wintertime, they have suddenly huge demand for more electricity. ERCOT has come out and absolutely said, this is what we're about ready to say has to do with their business, but it actually has to do with the people they serve, which is to say a humanitarian statement that they could not afford to sustain huge networks for the peakest of the peak moments, which is your summertime heat wave, and as well as wintertime huge storms. They could not afford to do that now without the assistance of Bitcoiners and Bitcoin farms who in the in-between times, which is to say probably 95% of the time, are paying for the electricity from those grids and therefore subsidizing the upkeep and the building of those grids. ERCOT has come out. It's been actually in their state Congress. I think they've testified now before some U.S. Congress Energy Committee about the same, that the use of or the customer that they have in the Bitcoin mining farms has absolutely served their customers and prevented even loss of life. They've gone that far, Sam. In the moments when they turn off, they now are not making their normal revenue. And it's by agreement with ERCOT that they've said, for every minute or hour that we're off, they're going to get paid so much money. That's by agreement. That's not some sort of penalty. ERCOT has come out and basically said, we are happy to sign these contracts. We're happy to pen them. And we've been happy to pay that out in the moment because, again, it's meant less disruption for their customers. It's meant less dollar loss for them when their customers would also go down. It's been a happy relationship, and a relationship that's growing seemingly more happy by the year in Texas since that example was brought up, and one where ERCOT knows it, the miners know it, and it's making it into the local news more and more and more, such that Texans, at least if they're listening, are becoming aware that that's part of the system that's actually helping them. That's why I say it's not just going from skeptic to kind of neutral. I find it really exciting.
We're getting to the place where we need to wrap up because I think we have some real world responsibilities that we have to get to. Not that this conversation wasn't a real world use case, or we'll let the listeners judge that. Sam, you had one more bucket. Do you want to throw that out? And maybe that's a place to close real quick.
Yeah. So the two things is just crap hitting the fan. So my understanding is the Bitcoin market is secured by how many nodes there are. And if you were to at some point get to 51% of them, you could rewrite the blockchain. Now, I don't think that that's probably feasible for any individual. But as I was thinking about nation states, if they were to want to get in to control Bitcoin, I don't think that would be outside of a nation state's capability to change the market. The other thing with crap hitting the fan is that if the dollar were to crash, I don't think that having Bitcoin solves your problems in America because everything's destroyed at that point. And the other thing is, if you're in a situation where you don't have access to electricity or the internet, you can't use Bitcoin. So those are kind of like all like, kind of outlandish scenarios, but things of, oh, that's not good if those things were to happen. And yeah, that's my final bucket.
I totally agree. And so to maybe this is ending a little bit on a flourish rather than a nice reasoned explanation like we have had at some of your other questions. So I'll throw out a legendary but probably not real quote from Martin Luther and kind of then appropriate it to Bitcoin. So here's the legendary quote. Luther is reported to have said, although I've checked with some Luther scholars and nobody has ever found this as an actual Luther quote. But the quote is, if the end of the world were coming tomorrow, I would still plant an apple tree today, right? So,
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm going to say, if the end of the world were coming tomorrow, I would still invest in Bitcoin today. I'm sure that the world will not pick up my phrase nearly as much as Luther's phrase, but it's to say I choose to be involved in Bitcoin not because it might solve that possible scenario when there's a zombie apocalypse, but rather because the world that I live in today, right now, I think it solves enough problems and it does enough good in our world, and frankly, I think it's good enough for my neighbor that we continue to use Bitcoin. Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. You're very courageous to come on to a podcast with three Bitcoin ravers and to pose your skeptical questions. But I think this shows, especially in the church, what it can look like when we sit together as brothers, as sisters, as people of God do every Sunday in their local congregation and talk about the Word of God, talk about things that affect our neighbor. And so great to have you on with us, and we look forward to another episode. Listeners, let us know if you have further questions. If you agreed with Sam and you think we're washed up, let us know. And if you have more questions, hopefully we can answer those, or maybe even we'll put you on a future podcast and let you ask your questions yourself. So until next time, peace.